A grave silence settled among them at that moment. Time stopped, and all Aria could see was Lloyd and herself. It was as if they were the only two people left in the world. Let's fall down to hell together, he smiled. That day the clouds swept the earth. Her vision was veiled by the lightest of mists. She gazed into his grey eyes. But the haze blurred her field of vision. He stared back, yet his orbs showed no light. They were hollow and empty. As the fog dispersed, so did Aria's illusion. Now it was just a memory. Aria could see her breath forming a small, misty cloud in the cold air that was close. She had almost spoken. She snapped back to reality. The time which she thought had stopped began to move again. You don't seem to understand the situation, do you? Aria was composed, her face stark. Lloyd's expression darkened, and he pressed the blade deeper into her flesh. Blood oozed down her nape. It was painful, but Aria made no sound. She was used to enduring pain and suppressing her moans. So it's true you can't speak, he snarled. Was he testing me? Aria nervously looked at him. He doubted her since the very beginning. He sharp was. I found out. The cold icy rain poured over her pale soft skin. Her posture weakened under the weight of her soaked dress. It hurts. Her fingers loosened. Aria dropped her umbrella. At last Aria's face, which was hidden by her umbrella, was finally revealed. Lloyd's cold expression was now replaced with a puzzled look. Rabbit, her rabbit mask had caught him off guard. Rabbit, Lloyd murmured. He creased his forehead at the sight of Aria, shivering in the torrent of heavy rain. Rabbit, if you're going to answer my question by disclosing your true intentions, just mouth your words and I'll read your lips. True intention? If it was my true intention, she had escaped her cage just to meet him. She was willing to sacrifice herself for his sake. Aria would voluntarily be a stepping stone if it was meant to help achieve her benefactor's goals. She wouldn't mind completely burning herself out just to let him shine his brightest like the splendid afternoon sun, but would instead feel honored just to be given a chance. I can't say it. Aria recalled her memory with Diana. It felt really nice when she was stroked, so she patted his head. Lloyd stared at her, as if she was insane. Seems like you've never held weapons before, Lloyd said, touching Aria's hands. He observed her slender fingers. They were soft and smooth. She had no calluses. Don't you have to learn at least one weapon at your age? The age of 10. Aria was shocked. There are only bones in your body. Where are your muscles? Why would 10-year-olds have muscles? Aria tilted her head. Lloyd grabbed her wrist and held it for a while. After that he placed his fingers on his own wrists. And then he frowned. It's a miracle for you even to be alive. You're very frail, and your pulse is weak. Your bones are so fragile that they might break if I squeeze too hard. Are all humans outside our territory this week? Lloyd paused. You're even worse than Mother. His words trailed off. He stared at her, as if she was a rare animal, one he had never seen before. I was feeble from the start, and my body only grew weaker because I was abused and malnourished. Aria thought to herself. She inadvertently put her hand on her neck and trembled in pain. She sucked in a sharp breath as the pain spiraled across her body. Lloyd pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket and flung it towards Aria. Instinctively Aria grabbed the flying handkerchief. Use it and throw it away. Aria alternatively glanced between the handkerchief and Lloyd's face. Then she lightly pressed her nape's open wound. Lloyd, who couldn't stand watching, scooted closer to her and snatched it back from her hands. Let me do it. He skillfully tended to her wound. The wound was not actually deep, but it seemed as if the blood kept gushing out due to it being diluted with the rainwater. He stopped the bleeding in an instant, wrapped the handkerchief over her neck and tied it. Why are you wearing a mask? Lloyd lightly tapped her mask with his finger. Stunned by his sudden action, Aria flinched. You rabbit. The rabbit mask was soaked with rainwater. I was glad that the cotton was soft, but now it feels uncomfortable. Aria thought her appearance was quite funny and amusing, but Lloyd kept a serious face. Were you preyed by a rat? Aria staggered at his words. She hadn't thought that she was under suspicion. His intuitions were relatively sharp. Gutter meant the criminal world. He used such terms to lessen the fatalness of his words. Those that are raised as prey are unable to speak, or have their tongues cut off. This is so that they can't expose their masters. The prey lived and died for their masters, serving them with loyalty all their lives. They were born to be eaten and are meaningless without them, just like lifeless puppets. You came here as Count Cortez's daughter, but your name isn't listed in the family register. How will you verify yourself if we didn't believe you at face value? Lloyd scrutinized. As he had said, Aria couldn't prove her identity. Moreover, there's a lot of bad blood between the Valentines and the gutter rats, Aria belatedly thought. As infamous as the Valentines are, they mainly had many enemies. Therefore, It was understandable as to why he was so wary of Aria's sudden appearance. There's only one way to tell if someone was prey or not. Was there such a way? Rats had infiltrated and spread out all across the empire, and because of that, the emperor suffered from massive headaches trying to distinguish them from his loyal subjects. Say, "I'll kill you fucking rats." Well, Aria was unable to comprehend how such a conclusion was made. As expected, you're one of them. As Lloyd was about to unsheath his sword again, she quickly placed her hand above his. Her fingers were trembling. For the first time in her life she actually tried to curse. She closed her eyes. After a brief hesitation she parted her lips. "I'll kill you fucking." That was her first time swearing. Aria didn't say it out loud, so she wasn't as nervous as she had thought she'd be. "Just say it straight. I'll kill you fucking rats." Did I pass? Lloyd's expression was not the best, but he relaxed his grip on the sword handle. "If you're not working as their prey, then get your hands off," he grumbled. "Standing up for yourself is a way to survive. There is no place in the house of Valentine for a child as weak as you," he retorted and shook her hand off. As he took his leave, Aria was left alone in the hallway, and after he was completely gone from her sight, she walked away as well. Suddenly, as she was about to turn around the corner, she heard a bunch of whispers. "The Grand Duke is gone?" The maid rattled on, circulating all the gossip she had heard among the other servants. They were whispering, but Aria could hear them quite clearly. Sirens were weak in general, but their 5 senses were exceptionally sharp. The 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Like how a particular race was born with artistic talents, sirens were known for their keen senses. "I'm glad I wasn't found out by Lloyd." In fact, Aria had barely escaped. She'd instinctively reacted to the sound of Lloyd's footprints and turned towards him. Fortunately, he didn't seem to have noticed her senses because of her feeble appearance. The powerless and weak Aria. She hoped that he would continue to believe that. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, whenever she gets sick, she drives out all the servants. I heard that she wanted to be by herself." "Yes, even the Grand Duke and His Highness are no exception." "I also heard that there were a lot of deaths today," the maid said with a sigh. "I know. His Highness tracked down the spies who infiltrated the Grand Duchy the other day, and he captured them all. Furthermore, he locked them inside the jaguar's cage to set them up as an example." The maid shuddered. It seems like the father and son who were driven out by the Grand Duchess were taking out their anger on others. She immediately understood the Grand Duchess had been fighting between life and death. This might even be her last. If he couldn't be with her during her death, he might actually go berserk, but he was still going around killing people apparently. He wasn't the offspring of the devilish ducal couple for nothing. "Did he let me live because I seem weak?" Aria felt lucky nonetheless. She still felt a throbbing pain in her neck. It wasn't the first time that the madam fell. She has passed countless hurdles. But this time be careful with your words. "But you know it's the first time that the madam has actually made a will." The maids went silent. After a while, one of the maids muttered with a saddened voice, "Yes, she wishes to be buried beneath the cherry tree." She was looking forward to springtime, but what greeted us were endless rainy days instead, so she must be disappointed. She was really anticipating the cherry blossoms to bloom this damn rainy season. Why is it raining in spring? God damn it, fuck this world, just perish already. In fear of those in the devil's mansion, they naturally exaggerated, cursing God and praying for the destruction of the world. After a while their voices faded away. Cherry blossoms. The moment Aria heard that, she remembered the cherry trees she'd seen while strolling around the garden. She immediately ran back there. Fortunately, no escort had been assigned to Aria. Furthermore, no one cared about where and what she was doing now that the Grand Duchess was on the verge of death. And also because Diana had said that it was okay to admire the flowers, she waited until late at night. It was almost dawn. Aria looked up at the sky with her head tilted back and slowly rose from the cherry tree she was leaning against. She placed her hand on the cherry tree. Although the petals had fallen off after the rain, it was still a huge tree. Big enough to be seen from the Grand Duchess' bedroom. Song of Life. She finally got to sing it again after a long time. Aria closed her eyes, then a sweet melody emerged from her lips. As she closed her eyes, it felt as if her emotions were spreading out and enveloping everything around her. An intangible bond developed between them, a melody beyond the range of ears but lucid for the heart. Chirp chirp, birds tweeted in response to the siren's power. Buzz, bees buzzed around, an audience of vibrant blooms, nature's euphony blending into the pleasant ambience. Aria outstretched her hand towards the sky. The wind brushed past her fingertips, leaves swayed in the breeze along with the earth's own voice singing. How lovely she was, always singing in tune with an orchestra. Not to mention this was the first time she sang outside. Count Cortez would always watch her closely, in fear that she might escape. That's why she couldn't go outside as freely as she wished to. He would not hesitate to kill animals that approached Aria with his crossbow under the Count's restraint. Singing was only allowed indoors, the basement where private parties were held, and inside the Emperor's cage. Tender and beautiful fronds of my beloved plane tree, but now Aria sang at her own discretion. She could hear the birds and the insects climbing the grass with serene ease, and the soft breeze caressing her. Let fate smile upon you. It was almost dawn. May thunder, lightning, and storms never bother your dear peace. The drizzling stopped, nor may you by blowing winds be profaned. Aria leaned over the trunk. A soft smile spread across her lips as she heard the regular beating of its heart. Golden rays of light came down as woven strands, falling onto the trees as it conjured the most brilliant mosaics, reflecting from each leaf and branch, making the scenery become something so enchantingly beautiful. Never was made a plant more dear and loving or gentle. Suddenly the mighty sun breached the horizon, and the sky exploded with gorgeous colors. The light surrounding the cherry trees gradually faded, and golden rays escaped the buds as they bloomed into flowers. Aria almost fell over. She felt dizzy for a moment, so she held onto the tree to support her body. Her body temperature dropped as she was still wearing wet clothes. She was cold and clammy, and she trembled slightly. Did I overdo it? Aria had intentionally left her wound unattended and got soaked all night. The power of her songs became stronger when she was sick and close to losing consciousness. People exert miraculous powers that go beyond the limits of their bodies when they are in crisis. Aria was the same, though I can't hold it any longer. As much as Aria seemed to have lost her mind, she would always notice her condition beforehand, and right now she was about to faint. Someone was walking on the grass. She turned her head to the direction of the sound. A man stood directly in her line of sight. Shocked, the man was at a loss for words. You were talking, no. That angelic song, no, you were singing, and the tree was. Is he a servant? Aria observed the man's attire. He then smiled as if he had come to his senses as expected. I am blessed. Hey, say something, will ya? You wouldn't be able to deceive anyone even if you kept your mouth shut. Did he think it was my weakness? How foolish! The man, who had been shouting a few times, began to give up after Aria just stared at him absent-mindedly. He started talking to himself. I knew it was strange. It doesn't make sense that her origin was kept a secret, especially since she'll become the future Grand Duchess. Aria's origin was top secret. Only the representatives of each department, including the butler and the head maid, knew. Aria asked them to keep it a secret. There's nothing wrong about taking precautions, but because of that, the attendant seemed convinced that Aria was not of noble origin. I can report this to the butler, but he glanced at Aria from head to toe and let out a chuckle. Then he whispered, why don't you sing more for me? Sing the song from before, then I'll pretend that I don't know anything. Aria stared at him indifferently. She was already familiar with such snaggers and arrogant glances. 100 million. So what the price of one song? It was a ridiculous price. He looked at her slack-jawed with disbelief. What kind of song costs 100 million? If Aria sang 3 songs, he could buy a residence within the capital. Hey, you don't seem to understand the situation. The servant began boasting about his evil deeds, and he threatened Aria that he had driven out an innocent maid by framing her as a thief. The servant's name was Toby. His technique to survive was finding others' weaknesses and framing them to get rewarded. However, Aria did not listen. Would you be able to handle the weight of the song, when you can't even afford the price? Aria replied with a bored tone. At that moment the sky flashed behind Aria's back and lightning came. A brilliant shock of white blazed throughout the sky, forking towards the unsuspecting ground. The thunderous boom followed after, with its warning a bit too late. Boom! Toby shuddered, his teeth grinding in suspense. What the hell? It was just thunder and lightning, he thought. However, the situation was quickly reversed. Aria stepped forward towards him, and he unwittingly stepped back. Then he tripped on a stone and fell onto his butt. Wait a minute! Toby couldn't fathom how he had just felt threatened by a child much younger than himself. Aria stretched her hand out to him. You have to compensate for your past mistakes, she spoke before singing the song that he wanted. Toby felt transfixed at the moment. He was unconsciously lost and speechless by her mere presence. He held his breath. This must be how the nomads felt when they found an oasis. Or the religious fanatics who finally witnessed God before their eyes. Aria whispered, putting her lips next to his ear as she left him dazzled by the ethereal melody. You won't tell anyone what you saw today. You must atone for your sins and pay the price at the same time. Toby snapped himself out of the trance. Pay the price. How funny! It was ridiculous to see a little girl with a cute rabbit mask scolding him. He tried to laugh out loud, but strangely he couldn't make any sound. It was as if his throat was clogged. What is this? He tried to move his hand, but he couldn't lift even a single finger. Aria passed by his stiff body. She acted as if he was just a stranger on the other side of the road. Then his feet moved by itself. He couldn't stop. No, stop it! Toby's face was as white as chalk. His body moved like a puppet doll. He was going insane inside, desperately trying to move, screaming for help, yet nothing came. His expression remained calm on the outside, and so was his behavior. He walked against his own will until he stopped. In front of him was the 3rd Knights Division's headquarters. They were in charge of protecting the security of the territory. He knocked on the door, and a voice told him to come in. What's the matter? In front of him was none other than the commander of the Knights. He was rumored to be extremely cruel when interrogating suspects. Oh no, Toby had one more secret. He couldn't tell anyone. He had leaked information about the Valentines' internal affairs several times. The Valentines were notorious, so every piece of information about them was sold at a very high price. I was confident that I would never get caught. This was very bad. The time during which the Grand Duchess was struggling between life and death was when the Grand Duke and the heir were frequently traveling. The traitor will be thrown into the beast's cage without any reconsideration. Oh dear God, please, future Grand Duchess. I was wrong. I admit my wrongdoings. No matter how much he prayed, it was already too late. Toby opened his mouth and spoke. I came to confess all my sins. My face feels hot and my ears hurt. She could hear the muffled voice of someone shouting, "Young miss." Young miss, from a distance, so noisy. Slowly and reluctantly Aria uncovered her face. She blinked, closed her eyes, and blinked again. She rubbed her eyes and scanned her surroundings. Where is this? Her eyes were blurry, so she couldn't figure out where she was. She leaned against the wall. It hurts, she muttered. Her head felt like it was going to burst. Suddenly disappeared. At that moment Aria's vision returned to her. It was Lloyd's voice. She did not suddenly disappear. She wasn't in her room in the first place. She heard voices answering his questions. Is that head made Betty? Aria could hear Betty stamping her feet. I was the last one to see her. Yes, I threatened her. I had said that I would kill her. Yes, with such a bold confession, Betty seemed to be at a loss for words. She was silent and couldn't answer anything for a while. Then it won't be strange if she hid because she was terrified, Betty stuttered. It is too dangerous for a young lady to roam alone in this mansion, and especially because she's from outside the border. After a moment of contemplating silence, he spoke. I'll take responsibility in finding the rabbit. Lloyd's footsteps went farther away. Idiot, you're going the wrong way, Aria thought as she listened to the footsteps of the boy walking towards the opposite direction. Aria tried to raise herself, but she didn't even have the strength to do so. Suddenly she heard the sound of birds chirping. She turned her head only to find a white pigeon sitting on the windowsill. Carrier pigeons. Some pigeons were trained to send letters. Little birdie cuckoo. I have a favor to ask of you, Aria said to the bird, the farthest room on the highest floor of the main palace. Cool, send them this message. She hoped the bird could convey her words correctly, though it was unlikely. She placed her faith in miracles. The bird spread its wings and flew out of the window as if it had understood Aria's words. Did the bird understand my request? That couldn't have been possible. She tracked the bird's location with her keen senses. However, her knees began to give out. With one step backward, she crumpled like a puppet whose strings were suddenly cut. Milady, she could hear someone yelling from afar. Hurry, call the doctor. Everything became fuzzy, and by the end of the words she was out cold. Something crashed into the window, surprising the maid who stood beside it. What was that? The lady-in-waiting turned her head. It was a bird. The bird had crashed into the window and had fallen due to the impact. But it flew up again and sat down on the windowsill. Then the bird started pecking the glass as if asking for attention. Wait, isn't that a carrier pigeon? Carrier pigeons were trained to fly to the West Tower, so they never came to the main palace, but this bird was very unusual. There wasn't even a note tied to its leg. So this isn't one of ours. The lady-in-waiting tried to shoo the bird away, but the pigeon didn't budge. It scratched the glass with its beak, slammed its wings against the windowpane, and chirped loudly. This crazy bird, what's with all the commotion? A voice suddenly spoke, followed by a fit of raspy coughs. The voice belonged to Sabina, the Grand Duchess of Valentine. Your Grace, I apologize for the racket. The maid bowed. No need to apologize. What is the bird doing? Sabina's throat seemed to be clogged, making her sound hoarse. Her silhouette could be seen through the gaps of the canopy bed's drapes. Her skin tone was ashen, not ghostly like a white person, just subdued and pale. Her once plump hands were now skin and bones. Her fingers now appeared longer, thinner, and frail. Well, there's something wrong with this carrier pigeon. He keeps rapping the window. Sabina scoffed. I'd like to see this brave bird. Oh, you mustn't. The doctor told your Grace to rest. I will only rest once I die. Your Grace is saying such things again. The maid frowned. The lady-in-waiting's eyes glimmered with tears, but she gritted her teeth and endured the pain. She couldn't just cry in front of the Grand Duchess. I was lucky to survive yesterday, but today might be my last, so I shall do what I want. Sabina knew that her time was running out. Death is a thorny road, but she had already given up, accepted, and was ready to depart. Madam, the head lady-in-waiting Diana would have been more strict if she was here, but unfortunately, she was away. She sighed and helped Sabina sit on a chair by the window. However, the bird immediately flew away. Once I find that pigeon, I'll turn him into food, the lady-in-waiting thought, gnashing her teeth. Sabina gazed outside the window and spoke. Those are cherry blossoms. Surprisingly, the cherry blossoms were in full bloom. That's absurd. It's impossible for them to bloom this fast, the lady-in-waiting muttered, but when she opened the curtains, her eyes widened and her eyebrows raised. The giant cherry trees that lined the palace were clothed in pink and white blossoms. The boughs that used to be so bereft suddenly became beautifully adorned, and their scents were diffused along with the spring breeze. It was akin to a miracle. Lloyd headed to the place where he first saw Aria. Several jaguars followed him from behind. Find her. The jaguars roared in response. Suddenly something fell to the top of his head. Lloyd took it off with his hands and observed the object. A petal. What on earth? He raised his head. The petals fluttered down like gentle rain. Amongst the bare trees only the cherry blossoms showed signs of life. Is this one of Carl's pranks? When did he start doing these kinds of things? No, he couldn't have learned the magic of blooming flowers in the first place. The palace's sorcerers were in charge of burning the petals, not making them bloom. Then this must be the work of someone else. Lloyd immediately thought of the little girl who stood absent-mindedly under the rain holding her umbrella. The dancing petals resembled her hair flowing in the wind. As expected, it's annoying, Lloyd thought as he gazed at the cherry trees. A while later his jaguars came back while carrying an item in their mouths. It was a small old leather bag, and it was soaked in rainwater. It's that kid's. Aria held the bag tightly as if it were her lifeline before. She must have dropped the bag when he pointed his sword towards her neck. She must be hiding something. Poison weapons. Lloyd instantly opened the bag. However, its contents were not what he expected. The bag was filled with cards, ink bottles, and broken quills. Was she using these to communicate? That idiot. She wrote everything on her cards and didn't even try to discard them. Her conversations could be easily leaked. She should have burned them on the spot. However, this was a good advantage for Lloyd. He could find information about her, and if she were even a bit suspicious, he would kill her. The flowers outside are beautiful. She unexpectedly talked about flowers. Did she like flowers? I can see the flowers. I like them. He liked them too. So that's why she went to the garden? To see the flowers? Cocoa tastes like melon. Tastes like melon. He skipped to the next card. Soft white clouds floating on top. Whipped cream. Melon is delicious. She must have liked it, though it's not melon. My name is not idiot. As he went further back, the cards had traces of time. All of them were yellow, and the edges were completely torn. I was wrong. It's all my fault. Don't hit me. I will try to speak. I'm sorry for being a mute idiot. The cards were wrinkled. There were traces of Aria taking them out and reading them over and over again. The ink was smeared with tears. Please love me. That card was the last. Lloyd's gut clenched. He stood still as if he was paralyzed. Suddenly one of his jaguars bit his leg, making him lose his train of thoughts. They pointed towards the palace. That could only mean one thing. Aria was there. The boy who had been silent for a while let go of his grip on the broken quill and dropped it to the ground. Even from under the sheets, Aria was radiating heat like a brick right out of the oven. The fever was burning her up, both body and spirit. She could hear the chatter of voices getting louder and louder. Those were the voices of the nobles who came to see the siren sing for me. My angel, is that it? Are you kidding me? I spent all of my fortunes to see you. Don't you dare pretend to be sick. Get up now. If you don't want to die, then sing right this instant. Aria couldn't distinguish the voices from imagination and reality. Her head felt as if someone had shaken it until her brain was thoroughly bruised. When suddenly a nudge to her ribs jerked her awake. Aria's eyelids blinked open to the ceiling of the room, her breathing rate beginning to steady. Young miss, are you awake? Aria glanced upward, her mouth slightly open. She blinked and tried to refocus her vision. On her left was the head lady-in-waiting Diana, and on her right was the head maid Betty. Both servants stared at her anxiously. Diana tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and spoke. I'm so glad you're okay. That's right, she was in the Grand Duchy. Aria had almost forgotten. Were they the ones who took care of me? Aria was suffering from a fever. She laid still as her skin reddened from her blood's heat. However, there was always someone beside her, running to and from her room with cool cloths and wiping her body with a wet towel. Aria felt weird because their actions seemed to tell her that she didn't have to take care of herself anymore, even if she was sick. Oh no, I'm tearing up. Diana stroked Aria's head. She didn't falter this time. She had gotten used to Diana's warm touch. Her strokes and hugs brought a feeling of peace she had never known before, calming the storms in her heart, as if telling her she was safe within these walls, protected. The world around her melted away as her touch made the room warmer. Oh my, Diana beamed. How lovely. While patting Aria's head frantically, Diana remembered that she was still a patient. She scratched the back of her head. You have to eat this soup before taking the antipyretic, Diana said as she scooped the soup and blew the heat away. Aria flushed red in embarrassment, but she still took every spoonful of soup diligently. As the spoon went to her mouth, she realized something. Aria scanned her surroundings, searching for her bag. She couldn't find it. Worried, she wrote on her hands, Grand Duchess. Fortunately, she has crossed the hurdle. Phew. Aria breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that the Grand Duchess had not passed away yet. Oh, and the prince came to see you, but milady was sleeping at that time. Lloyd, he wanted to return this to you. It was Aria's bag. When did I drop it? Aria rummaged inside the bag to write on her card, but she could not find her quill. Instead, what she found was a luxurious fountain pen. She rubbed her eyes, wondering if she was actually hallucinating because of the fever. It was a fountain pen with gold trim and black ripple. The nib was gold and adorned with diamonds, and it was decorated with Catalonia's signature, the world's most famous craftsman. Even if it were displayed in a museum, the fountain pen would still be considered priceless. Aria stared at Diana with a worried look. Diana shrugged and replied, he must have picked it up from the office. That's right, the Valentines' fortunes were so vast that they could never be topped. When the Empress got one of Catalonia's works, she boasted all night at the banquet. Suddenly Aria found a note in her bag. Leave when you're all better. This was a farewell gift. If Aria did not disappear after she was healed, he wouldn't hesitate to kill her. Aria turned to Diana for advice. Does Lloyd hate me? Aria touched her neck, which was wrapped in a bandage. I thought I could live as long as I hid my abilities as a siren. I'm afraid I don't know. I am not able to figure out what's in His Highness' mind. Diana replied, he ordered us to let you try every kind of dessert. Diana muttered briefly, showing signs of trouble, even though such a thing isn't possible. Isn't that like the last dinner? Aria glanced back at the note ordering her to leave once she was cured. If she was kicked out, she wouldn't be able to taste any more desserts. Maybe Lloyd was trying to be thoughtful by ordering the maids to serve Aria all kinds of desserts. If you want to eat all types of sweets, you have to get better first, Diana said as she gave a pill to Aria. Aria immediately gulped it down. You take the pills so well. I'm proud of you, Diana said. Then she gave a small jar to Aria. What is this? Inside the jar were small colored grains. They glittered attractively in the light like majestic gemstones, giving off an ethereal glow. Do you like star candies? Star candies, this is candy. Aria looked inside the jar, opened the cork lid, and chewed on a piece of the star candy. The sugary aftertaste hovered on her tongue. I'll eat one more, the candy called to her seductively, promising moments of bliss that would melt on her tongue once it was finished. Her heart ached for more. But Aria hastily put the lid back on and returned them to the drawer. She wanted to savor them for a long time. She looks like a squirrel hiding her acorn. The servants clenched their teeth, not because they were annoyed, but because of Aria's unbearably cute actions. They desperately wanted to pat her head. However, only a certain lady-in-waiting was allowed to stroke her hair. We can't stroke the young miss. She would probably give out the I'm not a baby card again, pouting with her cute chubby cheeks. The servants glanced at the lovely child, hoping that one day it would finally be their turn to stroke her head. The servants would bring flowers every time they visited Aria. This is called dahlia, this is a primrose, this is grape hyacinth. The language. Before long, the guest room where Aria was staying became crowded with vases of various flowers. The air was also perfumed by their heavy scents. This is my first time seeing these many flowers. Aria stretched her neck like a meerkat to look outside the window. Young miss, don't stand by the window anymore since there's a lot of flowers here already, Diana said, holding a bouquet in her arms. Aria nodded. And from today onwards, these knights will temporarily become your escorts. Diana appointed escorts for her because she was afraid that Aria would get sick again when left alone. The knights who stood behind Diana greeted Aria one after another. They were very polite, all except for one. His name was Sir Andrew. To be forced to leave your post just to escort a child, he must have thought of it as a hassle. The knight looked discontented as Aria observed him closely. Her nose started to tickle. Achoo! Everyone stared at Aria with surprised expressions. Achoo! Sniff! Aria snuffled after her sneezing stopped. She didn't have allergies, but strong aromas tended to make her sneeze. She blushed. Head lady-in-waiting Betty interrupted whilst holding a book titled Hospital Etiquette. Please look at this. The book said that fresh flowers are banned within hospital premises, especially for outsiders. What? Why? Because there's a risk of allergy or infection. But then outsiders. Aria tilted her head, rubbing her itchy nose with the sleeves of her dress. Diana and Betty exchanged glances with each other. But isn't the madam from the outside too? I change the flowers in her vase every morning. Well, people have different conditions. Some are weaker than the others, but that means the young miss is weaker than the madam. Get rid of the flowers right away, Diana ordered. The maids proceeded to clear out all the flowers in the room. Aria frowned at the removed flowers. Phew, it almost turned into a huge problem. I apologize for my carelessness. This is my first time nursing a child from outside the border. Outside the border, she had heard it a few times before. Aria had to ask what it was to satisfy her curiosity. I mean outside the territory. The border refers to the Ingo Mountains surrounding the Grand Duchy of Valentine. Am I weak? Diana smiled and gently answered the question. Well, the people from the Grand Duchy are very strong. Everyone here is confident in their physical abilities and strengths. She was right. The beasts she saw here were gigantic. Furthermore, the humans weren't normal. Everyone here is confident in their physical abilities and strengths. They were the exact opposite of Aria, who was weak but had excellent senses. Aria stared at Diana with inquisitive eyes. Well, no matter how hard you train, one will never be comparable to the Valentines. A shiver ran down Diana's spine as she swept the goosebumps off her neck. She stared anxiously at Aria. But why won't your fever go down? Because only one day had passed, Aria thought. The book said that if you have a fever, you have to cover your body with a blanket and sweat it all out. Are you trying to kill her? Wrong. What you should do is to give her a cold bath. Heavens no, you'll freeze her to death. The best way is to raise the room temperature to maximum. And so their argument continued. I've taken the medicine anyway. My fever will come down eventually. Young miss, I made ginger tea. What if the peculiar taste of ginger worsens her condition? I've never thought of that. The maids had a very creative imagination. Do not fret, for I have prepared this in advance, Betty said, revealing a bowl on the table. She was holding another book titled Foods to Offer During Fever. I made this by beating honey and egg yolk until they foam. Then I mixed them with milk and butter using a whisk, she said triumphantly, telling the others that it was what outsiders used as a remedy. One of the maids asked, but head maid, don't raw eggs have a risk of contamination? Contamination, she could get food poisoning. Betty hastily disposed of the bowl. The maids started to gather. Then what should we do? One of them whispered, just watch her until she gets better. The maids murmured with each other in very small voices. Fortunately, Aria could hear them as clear as day thanks to her keen senses. Is that really all right? I mean, outsiders are weak in general, but the young miss is probably the weakest of them all at this rate. It's safer to think of her as an infant. I'm not a baby. Aria didn't like being treated as a baby. But truthfully, she was no longer embarrassed of the word. This was because they actually cared about her. I'm not used to it. Aria didn't want these moments to dissipate like smoke, the feeling of being cherished. They respected her as a person regardless of her status, regardless of her ability. As a siren, Aria couldn't help but stifle a smile. Then she clutched Diana's sleeves tightly and handed her a card. Thank you. She thought she would use this card someday, so she had it written in advance. It should be okay to show it now. What a weakling this is, why we shouldn't allow outsiders inside the border. A small whisper could be heard amongst the other voices. Sir Andrew, he was one of Aria's appointed escorts. The other servants missed his remarks because his words were very faint, however it was clear to Aria's hypersensitive ears. Their class is different. I'm not even sure if she can give birth to an heir. Aria stared at the knight, and when they made eye contact he looked slightly flustered. No way, I'm sure she can hear me. It was impossible for her to hear him. She was at a distance where he wouldn't be able to hear himself either. Moreover, neither the knights nor the servants glanced at Andrew, who was sitting in the corner of the room. Aria was the only one staring at him. Well, so what if she heard it? The knight brazenly raised his chin. He knew it was useless to direct his anger towards her, but he didn't want to leave his post just to escort a child. And he was all the more pissed off at her since her origin was unclear. I'd rather babysit the prince. She became the prince's fiancée without even doing anything. There was no dowry, no gifts, and they didn't even prepare the marriage papers. Her father signed a waiver of parental authority, and she was instantly the future Grand Duchess. It was absurd. They said that the prince held her at sword point. The knight glanced at the bandage around Aria's neck and laughed arrogantly. No matter how much they thought of it as a marriage of convenience, the consent of both parties was extremely necessary to establish a healthy relationship. However, the prince raised his sword against her exposed neck, so he must have hated her too. She should be relieved that she didn't get kicked out despite how much he hates her. It was clear that she was going to be banished even before their marriage. This was why Andrew was not afraid to act rude to the prince's fiancée. Class. Aria snorted at the ridiculous word dividing people into classes based on their social status. What a foolish judgment, whether it was the Valentines, the emperor, or even the pope. They flocked in groups based on their similar backgrounds, but in reality we were all humans. Humans who could do nothing but bleed when they were stabbed in the back. The Valentines were outstanding and powerful. Their skills were unrivaled across the empire and beyond. But if it were true, then how did the massacre happen? Why did Lloyd go crazy? Aria thought that all humans, including herself, were imperfect. There was no such thing as a perfect human. Was it so important whether we were born a noble, commoner, or even a slave? No, we were all humans, and we were the same. Aria was vexed. The servants had poured their hearts out just to let her feel at home, only for him to ruthlessly trash their efforts. Aria took out her fountain pen and wrote on a few cards, then she pointed her finger towards Andrew. He seemed uncomfortable, but he still approached the little girl. Just say it. Oh wait, you can't pardon me, he sneered. Goodness, Sir Andrew, were my ears mistaken? I apologize. It is my first time seeing an outsider with such a weak body, so I wasn't mindful of my words. He gave an insincere apology. Diana's expression was full of disbelief. She couldn't apprehend the words that came out of his mouth. Didn't the Grand Duchess come from the House of Valois? The family had produced honorable knights for generations. What do you mean by that? I cannot put my mind at ease. Even the madam, who had been trained as a knight since she was young, couldn't bear it. Let alone a child as weak as her. Sir Andrew, if you dare say another word, I will not hesitate to report this conversation to His Grace. Diana scolded with a grimace. Then Aria handed out a card. What is your age? Age? I'm 24 this year. Since Aria died when she was just 20 years old in her previous life, she should be 4 years older than him now. She put up a pitiful act. Health, status, strength, those things are based on you being born with luck. It's such a pity that you have earned nothing by yourself during your 24 years of life, and now you're so proud of this hollow shell of yours. The knight stared at her, too shocked to speak. He had never thought that a 10-year-old girl would criticize him. After he grasped the meaning of her words, his face flushed red in humiliation. This Andrew Beauport, the second son of the Beauport family, the Grand Duke's vassal. He was a knight from the Fourth Order of Knights. The Fourth Order of Knights was the order of ordinary knights that were not able to associate with the other orders, and because of that they were often ignored by the others. As a matter of fact, Andrew was only able to join the order because of his family's influence, not his abilities. That was his inferiority complex. He had it hidden in the depths of his heart, and didn't tell anyone. But Aria's words pierced right through it. Sick people will get better after taking their medicines, but I don't know what to do about people with rotten hearts. I'm sorry. A short chuckle was heard. One of the escorts was futilely suppressing his urge to laugh. Trembling in shame, his glare went from Aria to the other knight's gaze. However, the knight just shrugged his shoulders, not minding his furious expression. You are nothing without your family. Is what they would say, these lowly scum. Sir Andrew gritted his teeth. Has he even experienced hardships? Aria thought. She had been abused all her life, sold by her father as a sacrifice, and was in a situation where she could be expelled empty-handed. Then have you ever achieved anything by yourself? Adults should never say such things to a child. Even so, he was blinded by rage. He couldn't think of anything else to appease his anger. Unexpectedly, Aria smiled at him. She gazed at Andrew as if she was dealing with an immature child's tantrum. She presented her next card. When I grow up, I will never become an adult like you. He was utterly ashamed. Diana, Betty, and the other servants were inevitably surprised. They had never known that Aria, who was so innocent and lovely, had a side like this, but at the same time they held great respect for her, especially Diana, since she was the one who knew Aria best. Although they are both of noble lineage, she didn't bring up her peerage. She only exposed how he despised his knighthood that his grace had bestowed, because it was nothing more than a mere shell. All humans were the same, but without having an ideology it would be impossible for her to say things like that. It was a revolutionary thought, especially in the Pineda Empire where feudalism existed. What this? Andrew shouted. When he realized he had just yelled at the future Grand Duchess, he covered his mouth. Sir Andrew, are you mad? Do not disrespect the lady ever again now. Step back. Even the knights who were displeased with his atrocities stood up for Aria. You bitch, I mean young miss. As he directed his angry scowl at her, Aria tilted her head. Since he was so fixated on class and social status, Aria wanted to show him the real difference. Unfortunately, there were too many eyes here. Shall I secretly visit him later? Then again, he wasn't worth dealing with. More than that, he's very irritating. As Aria watched the servants mutter in disbelief regarding Sir Andrew's audacious remarks, she heard a tiny voice. Bitch. The voice was short and sounded like it came from a child. However, it was filled with a perceivable aura of intimidation. Startled, everyone turned their gaze to the open door. Leaning against the door, the boy stared at the knight with a stern look. His eyes were like a void of darkness. Andrew knew that his stone-cold glare was targeted at him. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and his unblinking eyes popped like a fashioned toy doll. A bead of cold sweat dripped down his back, and his skin became as pale as the blade that flashed before his neck. Decapitation. He was beheaded, and his head rolled on the floor. The knight groped his throat, panting heavily. My neck. His head was still intact, however he certainly saw a terrible vision of his neck being cut off. This was the power of the prince. Lloyd sheathed his sword, making it seem like what he had seen wasn't an illusion. Your Highness, I was wrong. You can only repent in the presence of God. Don't beg the devil for forgiveness. He only needed a mere second to take out his sword and cut off a human's neck. It was at that moment the boy, who had sensitive hearing, heard the bedsheets rustle, and when he turned his head, Aria met his gaze. She shook her head as if telling him he shouldn't do it. What is she? But Lloyd's eyes went towards Aria's neck, which was wrapped in a bandage. It was a wound that he made. His expression darkened. Lloyd squeezed the handle of the sword as if he intended to crush it. But in the end he couldn't pull it out. He didn't want to seem like he obediently followed her words, so he gritted his teeth with a look of impatience and spoke. That's a cool nickname. Yes, you called her a bitch. What's next? Why don't you continue talking? It seems like you have more to say. Lloyd spoke. He couldn't just say it. The knight, covered with cold sweat, clenched his teeth and bowed his head. If you don't finish your sentence, I might mistake you for a person who's already tired of living. Lloyd waited for him to speak his words. Subsequently, the huge jaguars that followed the boy wandered leisurely around the room. Jaguars invading the room should be an unusual sight to anyone, but the servants just looked at them as if they were familiar with it. The only one trembling was Andrew. His hands were shaking and he felt sick to his stomach. The jaguar's tail brushed past his leg and he shuddered with an unseemly suppressed scream. Andrew wiped his wet palms to his trousers, moistened his lips with his tongue, and said, "The young miss is correct. Are you sure?" "Yes, of course, she said the right thing," but I wasn't able to fathom her words and dared to pervert it. The knight had chosen to throw away his pride, for he was threatened with his life. A person who speaks of class couldn't even say a word when the topic was pressed. Aria turned her head away from the knight as expected. He was tiresome to deal with. "So you're saying it's your fault?" "Yes, it is. How will you pay for it?" "How will I what?" Instead of replying, Lloyd leaned against the wall again. He had a cruel, disturbing expression coupled with a sinister menace. Sunken dark eyes mindlessly stared into his. He was the devil that drove his prey into a corner, and made them run to the trap on their own discretion. "How will I ever pay you back?" Was he bored because he couldn't kill him? The boy was motionless, he had a weary look on his face. Aria stared at him quietly, then their eyes met again. Lloyd's forehead creased, the atrocious feeling contained in his sullen eyes soon disappeared without a trace. He murmured, "If I'm not mistaken, the stableboys said that they're short on hands. I will go." "You will if a knight helps them. Their burden would certainly be alleviated, sir." Andrew clenched his fist tightly in shame. "He wants me to take care of the horses and clean its dung?" Andrew Beauport's biological mother was the former emperor's beloved niece, carrying the imperial family's blood in her veins. Although the situation had changed after the emperor's death and the crown prince's ascension, he still remembered the glory he had enjoyed in those days. That's why he thought of himself no less than the imperial family. Taking care of the stables was the most demeaning thing he could ever do in his entire life. "I will never mingle with them. To think I'll become the assistant of a lowbrow who can't even dare to make eye contact." But he was desperate to survive. "If I refuse, I'll die," he desperately repudiated in his mind. How about this? Let's revoke your knighthood until you can reflect on yourself. But then this is a fitting punishment for someone as daring as you, isn't that right? You seem unhappy." "Not at all. I'll follow your orders then," Neil Lloyd commanded. His order was simple and straightforward. Andrew immediately fell on his knees and lowered his forehead to the ground as Lloyd gave Aria the authority to strip off his knighthood. He turned his back on her and left, but before he stepped out of the room he paused for a moment. He sighed and swept up his disheveled bangs with a stuffy look. All of a sudden Lloyd strode before Aria with quick steps. "Are you a fool? Why is he suddenly? Why are you holding back?" She wasn't holding back in the first place. Aria had already said all the things that she wanted to the knight. Besides, she might have spared the knight's life, but it was never out of sympathy. She just didn't want her room to be dirted with blood. "From now on, if someone tries to touch you, just beat them up. I'll allow you to punch them, even if it's the Grand Duke himself." "But that's a little." Aria couldn't tell whether he was serious or not. While Aria continued to ponder, Lloyd fumbled inside the coat he was wearing and pulled out a brass knuckle. "And he gave it to her. Why is he carrying that around? To beat people up?" Aria couldn't be more surprised. "I'll grant you full authority while I'm gone." "Why would he do that?" Before she could ask, he made an excuse. "It's my last gift to you. Use that privilege to set up a residence outside until I get back. Don't come back to Valentine's palace before then." Lloyd led the jaguars away and left the room with them. Aria later found out that the encounter was the last time she would see him before he left for the academy. Right before dawn, Aria was suddenly awakened by a strange noise. What the sound had come from the window. Rousing from her deep slumber, she drowsily walked towards the knocking sound on her bedroom window. She opened her eyes, her eyelashes lightly batting against her cheeks as she rubbed the dreams away. Aria opened the window. It was the white pigeon from before. The pigeon circled around her before it slowly landed on the window. "Hello there, so we meet again." Aria lifted her finger to stroke the pigeon's head. The pigeon closed its eyes and tilted its head to match her touch. Whether it's humans, hounds, or pigeons, everyone responds the same way when their head gets patted. She chuckled. "I must look like a fool talking to a pigeon," and all the pigeon nibbled her fingers in response, as if saying, "Are you ignoring me now?" Aria, with a quaint expression, wrapped her bitten finger around the bird. The pigeon flapped its wings and pointed at its leg. There was a letter tied up around it. Aria unwrapped the letter and read its contents. "It's saddening to say that I am about to die, but the spring you brought to me was ever so brilliant that I wonder how warm summer will be. How prosperous autumn can be, how white the paradise of winter must be. I've thought of this for a while. So somehow I'll hold on to my life for as long as I'm allowed to. To the Spring Fairy." The letter was from the Grand Duchess. Aria read it over and over again. "The pigeon precisely flew to my bedroom window." Aria immediately slammed the window shut and quickly squatted on the floor. Her pulse pounded like a booming drum inside her ears. Was she exposed? No, the pigeon could have just flown back to me because I was the one who sent it there in the first place. Aria opened the letter again. The Grand Duchess called her the Spring Fairy. Could this mean that she won't ask Aria to reveal her true identity? This feels strange. She just wanted to do something to prevent the Valentines' massacre. However, she never expected to receive a letter. She said she would hold on to her life. It wasn't a request to save her life, but a letter of gratitude to Aria. With the hope Aria had shown, she would like to cling to her life and make a bold ambition to get through it somehow. I've never met the Grand Duchess in person, but Aria wanted her to live no matter what. She ran straight to the garden and picked up a freesia flower. Aria tied a note to the bird's leg, put the flower in its beak, and sent it to the sky. I will show you the wonders of all the seasons. Whether it's spring, summer, autumn, or winter, I will bring the promise of seasons to come until spring arrives again. Aria needed to find a place where she could practice singing in secret. She had thought of it as soon as her fever had gone down. After blooming dozens of cherry blossoms with her song of life, she felt her 10-year-old body reaching its limit. Her powers remained the same, but her current body couldn't withstand it because she hadn't been trained at all. I could die if I tried singing the song of healing or destruction, but in order to heal the Grand Duke's wife, she had to do it. She held out a card. I'm not sick anymore. I still think you have a mild fever, Diana said, touching Aria's forehead and neck. Aria stood up from her seat, pretending not to hear her. You have to rest one more night. Hey, young miss, are you listening to me? She tried to escape, but she was caught right away. Aria shook her arm a few times before giving up. Then after a while she looked up at Diana with her big puppy dog eyes. No, you have to rest. Stop giving me those puppy dog eyes. It's useless, I said. No, sighed Diana, sighed and finally raised both of her hands as a sign of surrender. Where do you want to go? Garden. Aria was currently banned from viewing the flowers. All right, I'll allow it just this once. Diana reluctantly agreed after Aria persistently insisted that she was not allergic to pollen. However, you must come back before sunset. Yes, if you get lost, ask anyone around for help. Yes. Do not hold back because everyone is willing to help. Yes. The conversation took longer than she thought it would. She had to raise the yes card several times before Diana actually let her go. After a while, Aria finally went to the garden. She looked around as she pretended to admire the flowers in the garden. The perfect place where I can sing freely. Suddenly she heard footsteps that ran towards her at a high speed. Aria hurriedly turned back to run, but it was too late. With rapid acceleration and a more bounding motion, the creature came right at her. Bark! Ah! Aria shrieked as she was sent reeling backward and fell. Her heart almost leaped out of her chest. She stared at the panting wolf who was wagging its tail enthusiastically. It was fortunate that she was alone. What if someone else was there? You're very naughty, she lectured the wolf while gently touching its snout. It shouldn't hurt, but the wolf whined, drooping its ears and legs. It sure knows how to make me feel bad. She was thinking of scolding it a little more, but it was too cute. She couldn't help but smile at the wolf. After Aria got up from the ground and confirmed that no one was around, she whispered to it. How did you get here? Aria asked while shaking off the dirt on her. But Bark, you ran because you missed me. Woof woof. It seemed she was right. Aria studied the wolf's reaction. It seemed to be able to understand what she had just said. Are we really conversing right now? Hand. As she stretched out her palm, the wolf raised its paw nicely over her hand. Get down. The wolf lowered himself and leaned on the ground. Aria was deeply impressed with the wolf. She was able to communicate with animals and could even order them around. It was beyond her expectations. That's why my father was so afraid of animals approaching me. She laughed bitterly as she recalled Count Cortez, who had hysterically dictated on killing any living creatures that came close to her. Do you know a place where people don't normally visit? Somewhere I can sing without anyone interfering. A secret place, perhaps. Woof, that's where your leader is. Woof woof. The place where the leader of the pack resides. And Aria envisioned the alpha, who was in charge of leading the pack of wolves. It didn't seem so bad to sing in that place. Aria climbed onto the wolf's back and wrapped her arms tightly around its neck. Please guide me there. Then the wolf immediately ran towards their destination. Moments later, Aria found herself standing in front of the Grand Duke of Valentine, the leader of the wolves. Aria and the Grand Duke stared at each other awkwardly. On the other hand, the wolf wagged his tail and panted like crazy, as if asking for praise after fulfilling her order. What the Dwayne, the Grand Duke's personal aide, pulled out his sword, thinking it was an enemy attack. Confused and terrified at the same time, Aria hugged the wolf's neck tightly. Is this the Grand Duke's office? She was already skeptical. Along the way, the background kept changing rapidly as the wolf ran, and she had noticed the main palace getting closer. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Grand Duke of Valentine, Tristan, observed Aria riding his hound as he put a cigarette in his mouth. I didn't expect a child to ride my hounds like a horse, he said as he lifted Aria up. Aria grabbed her old bag like it was her lifeline, while her eyes darted constantly. The Grand Duke's smile deepened when he saw the distressed expression on Aria's face. I implore you politely, won't you treat my dependable canines as mercifully as possible? How about treating me kindly first? Aria thought, as he swinged her body around the air like a doll. The Grand Duke of Valentine must not know the meaning of polite. What shall I do with this devilish young lady? He asked, slowly exhaling a puff of smoke. His way of speech was very stiff and formal. He sounded a bit weird. I can't say that I came here to practice singing. Aria rummaged through the old bag and pulled out her card. She struggled while thinking of something to write, but the Grand Duke just stared at her patiently. Your Grace, it's too strained, my Lord Grand Duke. However, Aria was not his servant. If she lowered herself too much, it wouldn't make her look good. After contemplating for a while, she decided on the perfect title to address the Grand Duke. Father. Aria held the card close to her nose. She tried to look grumpy about being lifted in such a discourteous manner. I came because I wanted to see you. The Grand Duke was silent, while the aide beside him was too dumbfounded to even speak. Usually children would be too frightened to see Tristan. The Grand Duke of Valentine. Because of his bad temper and mischievous pranks, other children would cry and run away, but she willingly came over to him in person. What kind of life did the young miss have? Dwayne's expression was sympathetic. Good to see you again. Aria held the card tightly with both hands and grinned. She wasn't used to smiling, however, when she remembered Diana, Betty, and the other servants who took care of her. A genuine smile blossomed on her lips. She had never done it before. Interesting, the mere thought of their kindness made her insides feel warm and fuzzy. As she smiled brightly, the Grand Duke laughed in a teasing manner. You missed me, so you came to me while riding on the hound's back. Aria nodded. Honestly, she hadn't seen the Grand Duke ever since their first encounter. So she wondered where he was and what he was doing, though she wasn't that curious. I see, he said as his lips twisted into a wry smile. The prince had never spoken such words to the Grand Duke, so he was quite surprised, but hearing these kinds of things wasn't as bad as he thought. So what, you want to play with me? What do you want? Aria didn't know how to answer him. I should have thought of a purpose before coming here. They had no choice but to stare at each other. The Grand Duke had never played with a child before, and Aria had never played as a child either. Should I play with you like how I play with my son? The Grand Duke asked, tapping his red lips with his finger. Please reconsider, Your Grace. It's not a normal game for a child to play. Dwayne, who had been silent for a while, interfered with the conversation. The lady came from outside the border. Besides, I heard that she had just recovered from a fever a few days ago. What kind of game do they usually play to make him so nervous? Aria pondered for a moment. I can't even imagine them playing like a normal family. If she had to imagine, they would probably play a violent game with blood splashing all over. She was sick as soon as she came to the Grand Duchy. She looks weaker than an insect. The Grand Duke finally lowered and released Aria back to the ground. He stared at her, curious as to how she was still alive after all this time. Lloyd had never stared at her like that. Neither did Diana and Betty. So you're all better now? Aria nodded without hesitation. I want to play with the wolves here. If you're only here to play with the wolves, why are you? Her kids are quite erratic these days, he muttered discontentedly, clicking his tongue with an unpleasant expression. Well, duh, I didn't come to see you in the first place. Aria's eyes darted around the room while trying to figure out the perfect reply. Then she began to write on the card, I'd like to stay next to Father. At that moment, she hurriedly covered her mouth with her tiny hand. The air was filled with cigarette smoke, and it almost made her cough. Fortunately, she was mindful enough not to cough in front of the Grand Duke. I forgot about the smoke because it had always been part of my daily routine in my previous life. Her throat burned as she held back her cough. Tears began to accumulate around her eyes. Dwayne, who noticed Aria's condition, whispered into the Grand Duke's ear, Your Grace, I don't think inhaling second-hand smoke is good for the lady. Furthermore, she's already weak. There are also a lot of documents that's due today. So why don't you tell her to come back some other time? Forget it, he said, extinguishing his smoke in the provided ashtray. Then he leaned on the chair and spoke. Ventilate the air. Understood. Dwayne quickly opened the windows to ventilate the room. The smoke quickly escaped, but the breeze made the curtains flutter. Aria unconsciously wrapped her arms around her trembling shoulders due to the cold wind. The Grand Duke stared at her. You sure have a lot of needs, he said as he got up, took off his coat, and dropped it on Aria's head. Out of reflex, she unconsciously dropped the card she was holding to the ground. Aria got buried inside the coat, and she struggled for a while before she was able to poke her face out of the thick cloth. Then she looked at the Grand Duke. He had taken the card that said I'd like to stay next to father. And strangely, he put it in his pocket. Why is he taking that? The coat was so huge that she had to keep pulling just to prevent it from dropping down and obstructing her face. Then just breathe well next to me, the Grand Duke said. He made a request instead of playing with her. Aria wondered why he mentioned about breathing at all. I'm always breathing, obviously. Because of that, she was now conscious of it, and it suddenly became more difficult to breathe. Inhale and exhale. Aria started counting the intervals of each breath with her fingers. The Grand Duke chuckled since she looked like she was having a hard time breathing. You'll run out of breath if you keep that up. Aria thought he was unfair. She was breathing just fine until he pointed it out. It's rare to see your grace so relaxed, as if there's no more work, Dwayne said, bringing back a stack of papers and placing them all on his desk. These are the documents you'll need to approve by today. I need some time to breathe. Your grace can survive even if you stop breathing for a while. Are you telling me to keep working even if I can't breathe? Not at all. The Grand Duke kept acting as if he was dying, but surprisingly, he continued to skim through the documents and handled them in good order. Aria had nothing to do, so being the curious girl she was, she stood closer to the Grand Duke and peeked at the documents he was reading while stroking the hound's head. It was a document related to Viscount Cavendish. The report said that all the envoys who had been dispatched to the Grand Duchy of Valentine were dead. Although people feared the Grand Duke's power, they were more afraid that the devil's curse would spread. So this was that incident. Aria recalled Viscount Cavendish's eerie smile. The people that left for the Grand Duchy had died. It could have been an accident, but the Grand Duke was willing to cooperate when I asked him to give me a huge amount of compensation. I guess he isn't such a big deal after all. Viscount Cavendish had argued that the vassals were sick because of Valentine's curse. The Viscount was actually on the verge of ruin, but thanks to the Grand Duke's compensation money, he was able to pay off his debts and live a lavish life. They weren't allowed entry into our territory, but they still barged in and proclaimed that they got themselves cursed, Dwayne said. What about the investigation? The Grand Duke asked. There are traces of fire in the forest. I couldn't gather more details other than that. How annoying. I should just kill him. Aria was taken back at his cruel words. This much money should be enough to kill him 100 times. It'll be even more of a hassle if you murder people carelessly. Is that something I should care about? Of course not, Dwayne replied with an irritated look. Judging by the expression on his face, Dwayne seemed to say that it would trouble him. Not the Grand Duke. Does this mean that the consequences of him recklessly killing people aren't his problem, but the aides? The Grand Duchy of Valentine must have had their own regulations. Aria was amazed once again. No, come to think of it, it's not bad to give him money, the Grand Duke said, changing his mind like the flip of a coin. Dwayne's expression finally brightened. He seemed to anticipate the words that would follow. I can't wait to see how far he'll hang on to that false hope. I'll torture him until he crawls at my feet while begging for me to kill him. Cough, Your Grace, the lady is listening. Aria silently listened to their conversation and fell into deep thoughts. There must be a better way. Do we really need to give money to the scammers? Viscount Cavendish was a gambler, so it would have been better to make him go bankrupt. Humans don't change so easily. After receiving the compensation in the past, the Viscount would visit Aria whenever he had time because her songs were worth a lot. Even if he had the money, he would just squander it. Before long, Aria took out her fountain pen and started writing. At the same time, the Grand Duke and Dwayne's gazes turned to her. I know how to fix this. You? The Grand Duke seemed surprised for a moment, then put his hand on his chin as if waiting for her to do something. They should take firmicides. Aria came up with a solution. She was very serious, however. The Grand Duke, who had been silent for a while, burst into laughter. A wave of unrestrained laughter echoed inside the room. Dwayne also turned his head, pretending to look away, but his shoulders were shaking uncontrollably. She saw that he was desperately holding back his laughter. What's so funny? Aria looked at the cards again but found nothing unusual. The forest was filled with actual parasitic worms that could threaten one's life. She means that those idiots suffered from parasites, the Grand Duke said, rubbing his chin with his fingers. Aria's words really surprised him. She caught him off guard as he wasn't ready to laugh this hard. If what she says is correct, then we can roughly predict the situation. How amusing. The Duchy of Valentine was known for its abundant natural resources. Among them was the diamond mine. The mine has ores that can be turned into mana stones. Although mines were found all around the world, Most minerals didn't have the same hardness, streak, and luster as those in the diamond mine. Thus the price of minerals and ores from the diamond mine was far higher than those from other mines. Viscount Cavendish also tried to obtain the rights to trade from the diamond mine. However, he unfortunately failed, and upon being restrained, the Viscount shamelessly retaliated and tried extorting large sums of money from the Grand Duchy. The problem is that the duchy is rich in natural resources. The living beings that resided in the Grand Duchy were strong as well. Both humans and animals, even the parasites. Once Viscount Cavendish's vassals accidentally found a peculiar snake. The snake's scales shone like a rainbow with vivid luster. It was considered a sacred creature, and without having second thoughts the vassals cooked and ate it on the spot. The results were of course disastrous. Some of them got paralyzed, their whole body hardened like stone, and they lost their sight forever. In the end they all died a gruesome death. These were all words spoken by the Viscount when he was spending his leisure time inside Count Cortez's salon. Ah, I see why they laughed. They invaded another man's land without permission, carelessly ate wild animals, and now they were fighting between life and death. On top of that, they even asked for compensation when in fact their misfortunes were all due to their own negligent acts. It was so ridiculous that you could only laugh. I heard that outsiders will suffer from stomach aches if they don't boil the forest's water before drinking it. Apparently they also deem all living creatures in this land as monsters, the Grand Duke explained as he shifted his gaze towards Aria. But how did you know that? Diana said that I am weak because I am from outside the border. Betty said that if I eat raw food I will get infected. I am amazed. Did you deduce that conclusion after hearing that there was a forest fire? The Grand Duke asked in admiration. That's not it. Aria felt like she was internally stabbed, so she hugged the wolf tightly as it licked her cheeks. Dwayne, yes, your grace, give this message to the Viscount. They can get rid of the parasitic worms in their stomach with vermicides manufactured by the Grand Duchy. So tell them to pay the corresponding price for the cure, understood, and they have to pay monetary compensation for trespassing into the Ingo Mountains without my permission. The amount is. He tapped his finger on the desk while in thought. He seemed to be contemplating over the amount the Viscount should pay to help him make a decision. Aria stretched out her arm and pointed exactly to the money that Viscount Cavendish requested, written at the end of the documents, 1 billion. The Grand Duke moved his gaze along the direction of her hand, then stared at her again. The Viscount finally reaped what he sowed. You are wise indeed. At that time a smile rose around the Grand Duke's lips, though it was a devilish smile that undoubtedly made Aria's spine shudder. This was what happened when someone dared to belittle the Grand Duke of Valentine. In fact, the Grand Duke might be imagining Viscount Cavendish crawling under his feet and begging for mercy right at this moment. He's scary, at least I would have thought so in the past. Aria's train of thought was different from back then. She had no mercy for those who violate and trample on other people's rights in an unjust manner, all to satisfy their own greed. Only when they've experienced it for themselves will people realize how their greed can cause miserable pain to the victims. Aria looked at the Grand Duke with respect. She thought she should learn about the demonic Grand Duke's personal principles in which he enacted his revenge 10 times harsher than what he received. Dwayne, who was watching her while standing next to him the whole time, finally coughed. Then he whispered into Tristan's ear with a trembling smile, Your Grace, what well, please watch your expressions. It seems that the young lady is still afraid. What? How did he reach such a misunderstanding? Aria overheard Dwayne, and quickly pulled out another card. She quickly wrote down the words she wanted to say. Father is cool. What is she thinking? Dwayne seriously wondered if something was wrong with the child. In particular, she seemed to have lost her sense of fear. She says I'm cool. After reading the card, the Grand Duke took it from her hands too. Again Aria looked down at her empty hand as a question mark appeared in her head. Turns out I am surprisingly talented in caring for my child. Dwayne let out an exasperated sigh as he thought badly about his master. Whether or not his aide viewed him respectfully, the Grand Duke chose to not care and continued to ask Aria. You have helped me, so I'll have to repay you. Is there anything you want a reward? Truthfully, Aria had a wish. That wish was for her to not be kicked out because Lloyd told her to leave when he's gone. However, even if she asked him not to banish her, there was a possibility of her getting no response at all. Furthermore, just surviving and living in the palace was not enough if she was not accepted as part of the family. Then Aria would not be able to get involved in anything until the day of the massacre came. She needed to get close to the Grand Duchess as soon as possible. It would be better to get her to my side. Her help would lead Aria to a greater opportunity. Aria contemplated for a moment, then blinked before smiling widely. I want to meet and play with my father every day. As she lifted her head upwards, the rabbit ears also bounced along. The scene was lovely. It was so adorable that everyone's heart tightened. But with a serious look on his face, Dwayne whispered into the Grand Duke's ear, "This makes it clear she has never been cared for by a decent adult. So among many of the other adults I have no choice but to rely on your..." Dwayne, the Grand Duke's trusted aide who had always said whatever he wanted even with a blade at his throat, was finally punished today. As he rolled on the floor, Aria had no idea what and how he was beaten by the Grand Duke, as he just suddenly fell. However, the sound of his groaning seemed painful, so she looked down at him pitifully, and started patting him in comfort. "Ah, my lady, what an angel!" But before Dwayne could thank her, the Grand Duke grabbed Aria and lifted her up. "Nah, don't touch him, he's dirty," Tristan said as he treated his aide like a germ. "You can directly come to me. Or if you come with my hounds like today, you'll be able to find me wherever you are," he said while taking another card from Aria's grasp. Unexpectedly, the Grand Duke had allowed her to visit again. "If you come with my hounds like today, you'll be able to find me wherever you are," is what the Grand Duke said. So Aria rode on top of the wolf without much thought. However, Aria was mortified. Contrary to her expectations, the wolf ran to the opposite side of his office. "This road leads to the mountain range." This was the road to the Ingo Mountains that Aria had passed through to get to the palace. Aria brooded on whether she should stop the wolf or not. She wondered what the Grand Duke was doing in the mountains. "He told me to come and see him in person whenever I wanted, so he shouldn't be in a dangerous place." The wolf finally stopped in front of a familiar mansion. The mansion was built in the forest near the borders of the Grand Duchy. It was the place where the Grand Duke had first bought Aria, so this is the place where they inspect the outsiders. There were knights in black armors guarding the entrance of the mansion. They were the first order of knights called the Black Falcon. They were considered as elite soldiers of the Valentine's Knights, and their armors were engraved with the insignia of a black falcon. Everyone in the Empire knew that insignia. If people saw the Black Falcons in the capital, the streets would be buzzing in astonishment at the sight of them. Furthermore, due to Valentine's reputation, the Black Falcons were also known as a symbol of evil and ominousness throughout the Empire. Suddenly one of the knights reached out to Aria. "Oh, young Miss." Aria held her index finger over her lips, gesturing for him to be quiet. Then she put her ear on the door and heard a sound from the inside. "What is the young miss doing?" "Playing detective. She wouldn't be able to hear anything even if she puts her ears on the door." "The Black Falcons," murmured Aria, had a serious expression, as if she could really hear something from the inside. Her cute antics caused the knights to feel a pang in their heart. "What are you investigating?" a knight asked while suppressing a chuckle. "Should I answer him?" Aria thought as she stared at the knight, whose eyes glimmered with anticipation. In the end, she decided to tell him. "A murder case." The Black Falcons glanced at each other before breaking into hysterical laughter. "A murder case? Well, if you stay near the Lord, then you'll never lose your job as a detective. You've come to the right place. We'll help you find the evidence." They had a knack of lightening up heavy subjects. I can see that they were trying to brighten things up since I am currently a child, but this was not it. Their way of talking would only make kids cry. The Grand Duke, his subordinates, even his children, all of them had no talent in childcare. Now I know why the Black Falcons were as infamous as the Valentines. Aria thought Dwayne was the only normal person here in the Grand Duchy. He always has an expression that seems to mirror headaches while standing next to the Grand Duke. He must have taken the wrong job. Aria pitied the aide, then she focused her hearing senses to detect sounds from the mansion. "Unfair, you say?" Tristan spoke. "That's right. Well, I do not understand why we must compensate for the parasites." Viscount Cavendish. As soon as Aria knew the other person's identity, she immediately figured out what was going on. He must have brought the compensation money for the Grand Duke. However, by his intonation, it seemed that the Viscount had not prepared 1 billion. It wasn't unexpected since he did have a lot of debts. "It appears that you have misinterpreted my words. The parasites are also part of our private property. Weren't you people the ones who took it without my permission?" Aria heard the Grand Duke snigger. The Grand Duke of Valentine was deliberately mocking him. I suppose that's only fair, but your grace, please. The Viscount was obviously troubled. He has no other choice than to agree with the conditions since the cause of their illness has been revealed. His vassals might tarnish his reputation if he leaves it as it is. Besides, they had spread rumors about the Valentine's curse when it was actually a parasite infection. It could cause great mishaps if the rumors were to spread within the territory. Viscount Cavendish was wrapped around Tristan's fingers. Your Grace, the Viscounty had suffered from a massive drought last year. Get to the point. I was out of it because of serious financial difficulties. Please forgive me. Suddenly Aria heard a loud thud. Is he kneeling on the floor? Aria thought that he was being ridiculous. They were the ones in the wrong, but they were conceited enough to spread malicious rumors and even demanded money. Apologizing won't fix anything, and as she expected, the Grand Duke's response was cold. Do you think that I've come all the way here just to see your ugly self? Did the Grand Duke put a sword on his neck? Even if Aria couldn't see them, she could roughly predict the situation. Your Grace, I've told you several times already. You can only threaten him after at least 10 minutes of conversation, Dwayne said as he blamed the Grand Duke. I haven't killed him yet. Well, you can at least talk to him for 5 more minutes. You heard that? Let us have an honest conversation with each other for 5 more minutes, the Grand Duke said to the Viscount. Aria thought that the Grand Duke's tone was brighter than before. I'm pretty sure that he meant, if you don't give me a satisfactory answer within 5 minutes, I'll kill you. Even Viscount Cavendish seemed to have noticed the meaning behind his words. He quickly spoke. If it's all right with your Grace. This is an ancient relic that my ancestors found 500 years ago. Aria could hear him arranging items on the table. This is my family heirloom. He was selling his heirlooms. He must have been in a real hurry. All right, that's not bad. I'll deduce 700 million from your payment. Get the other 300 million within a month. A month is very reasonable. Of course it is. Now get out. Yes, the Viscount finally stood up and stepped back. Aria heard the clatter of his footsteps getting closer and closer, but before she could react, the door had already burst open. What the? A kid? She became a trapped bird. Aria had leaned her weight on the door, so when he opened it so suddenly, she had no choice but to stumble and fall on her. But as she lifted her head, her gaze came into contact with Viscount Cavendish. With a crooked face, the Viscount spoke. Don't just stand in front of a door. Wait. This hair color. He narrowed his eyes with a look of impatience. Then he reached out and took off Aria's rabbit mask. He caught her off guard. Aria hurriedly bowed her head and covered her face, but it was already too late. Viscount Cavendish had already seen her appearance. Cortez the clown, ha! Viscount Cavendish said as he burst into laughter. The House of Cortez was a very famous family. They were known for producing world-class musicians, but now they were famous for being a disgrace in the nobility. You look so much alike. I can see the resemblance, but since when did that clown have a daughter? How come I've never heard of it? Unlike his predecessors, the current count was ridiculed as a circus leader. This was because he had taken advantage of the sirens, a minority race, to bring back his wealth and fame. At this point, the only ones that came to listen to the sirens' songs were people whose lives were beyond redemption. Like people who suffered from severe drug addiction and looked for greater stimuli. Viscount Cavendish was one of them. Then is your song so fantastic, huh? He was a member of a secret society. The meetings they held were a complete secret to the other nobles. Aria knew this because she was also a member of the society. Though it wasn't easy getting into it because she had to make a pledge. But after Mother died, the pledge was useless. Aria's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. She didn't think that he would recognize her right away. Did you come here to sell your songs to the Valentines? Why don't you stop hiding like a clown and let the whole empire know your name, kid? With the Valentines' financial resources, that kind of thing is bound to happen. Will we be able to listen to the Sirens' song at the capital's Grand Theater? He grinned at the mere thought of it. If you truly have inherited your mother's skills, you will be deemed as an angel who came down to earth with the voice of a goddess. Aria squeezed the hem of her dress to hide her trembling hands. Maybe you could even sing in front of the emperor. Your father will love that, haha. The moment she heard that, her face turned pale. In an instant his words were like a prophecy. That was true. She was praised. Everyone supported her. Used the nobles, with their secular ambitions and insatiable greed, was the worst abuse of all. They kept on demanding her for more outrageous things as time passed by. They poured out secrets she didn't want to know. She asked for salvation, but they broke her leg, locked her in a cage. and forced her to sing until she vomited blood. However, a member of the Black Falcons urgently covered Aria's eyes. But through his fingers she could see the tip of a sword penetrating his chest. A gush of blood soaked on his clothes and trickled down his body. 5 minutes have passed. The Grand Duke of Valentine was the one holding the sword, and as soon as he pulled it out, the Viscount fell to the ground. His body was limp and I was saved. Aria slowly raised her head. The Grand Duke of Valentine put the rabbit mask back on her face as the fluffy texture brushed her face. Aria shifted her gaze to the Grand Duke. "Ah, you killed him in the end," Dwayne said after chasing the Grand Duke. He seemed to know that this was going to happen. "Oh well, it can't be helped. I'll go and settle this matter by accusing him of insulting the Valentine's name." As Dwayne quickly grasped the situation at hand, he immediately went out to get the job done. After working as an aide for about 15 years, he had no trouble dealing with these kinds of work. This shouldn't be too hard. Viscount Cavendish did commit a huge crime. Unfortunately, the Grand Duke wasn't listening to Dwayne at all. And he quickly muttered, "I see, I didn't even think about the situation." The Grand Duke did not know anything about the urgent meetings hosted by Count Cortez because he had never paid attention to it. He didn't expect him to be able to recognize Aria at first glance. Then he looked at the little girl. She looked pale, tired, and rattled as if she had seen a ghost. Even her eyes were quivering. She was obviously petrified. Does she hate being known as the Siren's daughter? If she doesn't like it, then she can just simply remove the title, the Grand Duke concluded. "Bring me a list of members that attended meetings hosted by Count Cortez." The knights standing before the Grand Duke obeyed his commands and bowed their heads. "Understood, every single one of them. Take care of them," Aria nervously gulped. The Black Falcons didn't speak as they immediately understood the meaning of his words. How did this video make you feel? We're interested in your emotional response and any thoughts it may have sparked. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell for updates.